Hello, students. Welcome back. So, today we will look at the last part of this chapter, Late Antiquity. We are going to conclude this chapter by looking at the cultural transformation of the Roman world in its final centuries. So, Late Antiquity is the term that is used to describe the final fascinating period in the evolution and breakup of the Roman Empire, and it broadly refers from 4th to 7th century. The 4th century itself was one of the considerable ferment, both cultural and economic. At the cultural level, the period saw considerable momentous developments in religious life. Emperor Constantine deciding to make Christianity the official religion, rise of Islam in the 7th century, but there were also equally important changes in the structure of the state. Diocletian, and it may be best to start with what changes began with Diocletian. He was an emperor from 284 to 305. Over expansion that was led by Diocletian had over expansion made Diocletian cut back by abandoning territories that had little strategic or economic value. These territories were completely abandoned. And he fortified the frontiers, he reorganized the provisional boundaries, and he separated the civilian from military functions. He also granted greater autonomy to the military commanders, and these military commanders now became a more powerful group. Constantine consolidates some of these changes and he added some changes of his own. This is Diocletian. The chief innovations of Constantine were in the monetary sphere, where he introduced a new denomination, the solidus, which is a coin of 400.5 gram pure gold. And in fact, it outlasted the Roman Empire itself, this coin, solidus. Solidi were minted on a very large scale, and their circulation ran into millions. There were millions of such coins. The other area of innovation was the creation of a second capital at Constantinople. This is the site of modern Istanbul in Turkey, and it was previously called the Byzantium. This area is surrounded on three sides by sea. As a new capital, it required a new senate. So the 4th century was a period of rapid expansion of the governing classes. Monetary stability and expanding population stimulated an economic growth. The archaeological records show considerable investment in rural establishments, including industrial installations, oil presses, and glass factories. New technologies like screw presses and multiple water mills helped in revival of long-distance trade with the East. All these helped to make strong urban prosperity and it was marked by the formation of new architecture and an exaggerated sense of luxury. The ruling elites were wealthier and more powerful than ever before. In Egypt, hundreds of papers, hundreds of papyri, that is papers only, survive from these later centuries, and they show us a relatively affluent society where money was in extensive use. So we can say that money was very important factor. Rural estates generated vast incomes in gold. Egypt contributed to taxes of over 2.5 million. I repeat, 2.5 million solidi a year was just in taxes of Egypt in the reign of Justinian in the 6th century. Large parts of the near Rhine and Justinian and last part of the near eastern countryside were more developed and densely settled in the 5th and 6th centuries than they would be in even in the 25th, 20th centuries. This is the social background against which we would see the cultural developments of this period. The traditional religious culture of the classical world, both Greek and Roman, has been polytheist. That is, it involved multiplicity of cults, and it included both Roman and Italian gods like Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, and Mars, as well as numerous Greek and Eastern deities worshipped in thousands of temples, shrines, centuries throughout the empire. So they believed in polytheism, and these were all the gods that they worshipped. They worshipped these gods in temples and shrines. Judaism also existed. The Christianization of the empire in the 4th and 5th century was a gradual and complex process. Powerful bishops lead the church. There were significant changes in the religious life as Constantinople declared Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. Traditional religious culture of the classical world both had been polytheist, and other religions in the empire were Judaism and Islam. During the late antiquity period, general prosperity was especially marked in the East. The Eastern Roman Empire population was still expanding till the 6th century. Meanwhile, the Western Roman Empire had fallen to the Germanic tribes. These are the gods that they worshipped. Polytheists had no common name or label to describe themselves. The other religious tradition in the empire was Judaism, but Judaism was not a monolith. Monolith is literally a large block of stone, but the expression is used to refer to anything and to anything of same type. So Judaism was not monolith, and there was a great deal of diversity between the Jewish community. Christianization of the empire in the 4th and 5th century. Christianization of the empire in the 4th and 5th century was a gradual and complex process. Polytheism did not disappear overnight, especially in the western provinces, where Christian bishops waged a running battle against beliefs and practices they condemned more than the Christianity did. The boundaries between religious communities were much more fluid in the 4th century, and the powerful bishops led the church to rein in the followers and enforce a more rigid set of beliefs and practices. The general prosperity was especially marked in the East. The general prosperity was especially marked in the East, where population was still expanding, and despite the impact of plague, which affected the Mediterranean in 540s, in the West, by contrast, the empire fragmented politically as Germanic groups from the north took away all the major provinces and established kingdoms that are best described as post-Roman. The most important of these kingdoms were that of Visigoth in Spain, that is destroyed by Arabs between 711 to 720, and that of Franks in Gaul. These kingdoms foreshadowed the beginning of a different kind of world that is usually called medieval in the East, where the empire remained united. The reign of Justinian is the high watermark of prosperity and imperial ambition. Justinian recaptured Africa from the Vandals. So in the 4th century, the empire was divided into two parts, Eastern and Western Empire. Eastern Empire was still developing, where population was still expanding, and even because besides the plague, it was still expanding. But the Western Empire was attacked by German tribes like Goth, Vandals, and Lombards, and they took over major part of the Roman Empire. Okay, so this emergence of new kingdoms marked the beginning of a new period in history that is called the medieval period. This is the difference between East and West. I'm not going to say this because I've already said it twice. Y'all can pause and read this screen. So the empire remained united under the reign of Justinian, which is the high watermark of prosperity and imperial ambition. Justinian recaptured Africa from the Vandals, and his recovery of Italy left the country devastated and paved way for the Lombard invasion. By the early 7th century, the war between Rome and Iran had flared up again, and the Sasanians, who had ruled Iran since the 3rd century, launched a wholesale invasion of all the major eastern provinces. Okay, then Byzantium was now increasingly known, and it recovered these provinces in the 620s. It was just a few years away from the final major blow which came from the southeast. The expansion of Islam from its beginning in Arabia has been called the greatest political revolution ever to occur in the history of the ancient world. By 642, barely 10 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death, large parts of both Eastern Rome and Sasanian empires had fallen to the Arabs in a series of stunning confrontations. These concentrations were eventually extended as far as Spain, Sindh, and Central Asia. And in fact, it began with the subjection of the Arab tribes by emerging Islamic states, first within Arabia and then in the Syrian deserts on the fringes of Iraq. As we will see later on in the next theme, the unification of the Arabian Peninsula and its numerous tribes was the key factor behind the territorial expansion of Islam. That brings us to the end of this chapter. As homework, you will do the question answers behind the textbook in your notebooks. You will go through the timeline on page 75 of this textbook. All right. And you will also go through all the notes that you have made of this chapter, because next class we are going to discuss notes. All right. All right. So we are going to see this short video, which is a nice sum up to what we have done today. Why did the Roman Empire fall?
In this tutorial, we will be examining a question that historians have debated for centuries. Why did the Roman Empire fall? At its height, the Roman Empire controlled the entire Mediterranean world, from Spain in the west to Britain in the north, all the way to Persia in the east. It encompassed over 2 million square miles of territory and over 60 million inhabitants. Roman technology had spread all over Europe, and Roman roads linked the entire empire with its economic, military, and cultural hub, the city of Rome itself. Rome didn't fall in a day, but over the course of more than 100 years, it slowly decayed and was unable to defend its empire. It did not crumble because of one reason, but rather a combination of reasons that took a toll on the empire's military strength and its economy over a long period of time. The traditional argument for the fall of the Roman Empire relies on the barbarian tribes that had begun invading Roman lands in the 4th century AD. The Huns invaded from the east, pushing the Germanic tribes like the Goths and Visigoths into Roman territory. The Roman armies were unable to deal with mass migration of barbarian tribes into their lands. In 410 AD, a Visigoth general even sacked the city of Rome itself. This is not the entire explanation. Rome was crumbling from within, not just from without. Severe corruption in the government, as well as unstable leadership, spelled disaster. A series of poor emperors led the empire to financial ruin. Some emperors were even assassinated in the chaos of civil war. Such an environment did not give the people hope in the government. Rapid military expansion and conquest was also expensive and depleted the empire's coffers. Wealthy citizens tried to get out of taxation. Eventually, the treasures of war and slaves dried up, and rapid inflation further weakened the economy. With such a lack of money, the empire was unable to field enough troops to protect its borders from barbarian incursions. In the 3rd century, the Emperor Diocletian divided the Roman Empire into 2 halves. While this made the empire easier to rule in the short term, in the long term, the 2 halves drifted apart. It made it more difficult for the western half to survive. They had to rely more and more on mercenaries to protect them, and these mercenaries had little to no loyalty to Rome. They only cared about getting paid. A combination of These internal and external pressures created a situation that even a strong leader would have had trouble dealing with, let alone corrupt and sometimes crazy emperors. One final factor dealt with religion. In the 1700s, the historian Edward Gibbon theorized that the spread of Christianity had also contributed to the fall of Rome. In the early days of Rome, the state religions celebrated Rome itself. The Roman gods symbolized civic virtue and the expectation of service and sacrifice in the name of Rome. Christianity spread a different set of virtues. Its followers were focused on the return of their Messiah and on preparing themselves for heaven after death. Many Christians questioned the emperor's divine status, and a belief in the glory of Rome gave way to a focus on the glory of God. Very simply, Christianity eroded the civic patriotism and loyalty that had helped Rome grow and expand for centuries. This process was finalized when the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome. Explanations in history are never monocausal. That is, there is never only one explanation for a historical event. Life is more complicated. It's important to understand that though some causes have more impact than others, that is, the barbarian invasions and the taking of Rome, other causes can have a part too. Without corruption, financial difficulties, and a lack of civic virtue, Rome could have fielded larger armies that could have possibly defended its borders and properly protected the empire. Deciding which causes are most important is what historians constantly debate as they seek to unravel the past to find lessons for the future.
So, this is exactly what must have happened. Like you all know, history differs from historian to historian. We are actually reading some historian's view on his take of history. You could have a different view, so could I. Okay? So, with this, I end today's class. I want you all to sit and write down those answers, make notes, and be prepared for the next class when we will discuss notes of this chapter before moving on to the next chapter. We will also uh, um, discuss the probable questions that can come from the all three chapters in one video. All right. With this, I end today's class. Stay home, stay safe, take care, and keep learning.